My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Elle Holcomb. It's September 3rd, 2024. We're at Björnson Vineyard in Salem. And Elle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
First question, as you probably know, is why wine?
I think it's both like cultural and experiential for me. My family's Italian and I grew up around the dinner table at Christmas or Easter, all of these major holidays with my Italian cousins always having big bulbous bottles of Chianti and wine and revering about, different things that they picked up from as simple as the grocery store. Always bragging about something like, this is the cheapest bottle for 94 points, but also really enjoying it and taking a sense of pride in it. So it always kind of piqued my interest. And I remember as a kid, I always wanted to go wine tasting, and I also wanted a horse, but didn't get the horse. I lived in Cleveland, Ohio. There was no room for a horse there, but and then I just kind of always had that in the back of my mind. And really, it was solidified when I was doing an internship in California. I went to business school and was working for a software company, doing a marketing consulting internship in Santa Barbara, California. And when I was out there, I actually had a really fun road trip driving all the way from Seattle down to San Diego. Crazy details along the way, I'll spare you all of those, but eventually I did make my way to Santa Barbara. And I was working for a company called QAD there, and every weekend I was out wine tasting. I was couch surfing my way down the coast, and one of the people I stayed with took me to my first wine tasting experience, and it was a place called Fess Parker, which is well known. It's the Daniel Boone owned winery in Santa Barbara. It kind of is the big to-do, very California winery, very large and like in charge and grand estate. They've got, a local tasting room in the downtown area of Santa Barbara. They used to. I'm not sure if they still do now. But I loved it so much that I just kept venturing out. And it was really Los Olivos in the San Ynez Valley, which is this quaint little town up there with super cute small restaurants and Airbnbs. And I'm like, man, what is this world? And, coupled with having come from growing up in the Midwest my whole life, just seeing the insane spread of topography and mountains that San Ynez Valley has to offer, it was just, jaw-dropping for me. And so I came back home, graduated college, and tried to stick it out, but couldn't leave that thought in my mind. I was working for a financial tech company once I got out of business school, and sure enough, a year and a half later, I was like, I have to go back to this to investigate this calling, and so that's when I stopped and jumped and worked in restaurants.
All right, we'll pick it up there in a minute. Tell me a little bit more about life before wine and what your sort of plan was as you were heading into college.
Life before wine. Well, before college, I wasn't 21. It doesn't mean I hadn't had anything to drink, but I wasn't engaging in things the same way that you do now in wine. And I really was strong-minded. I really wanted to own my own business. I always wanted to do that ever since I knew what that was. I would create small little businesses and PowerPoints for my parents. I would try and knock on neighbors' doors and sell them, and every lemonade stand, everything down to like hot chocolate mixes in like a little canister, and try and do everything that I could. And I would buy all of these books at the book fair that were, little start your own business books for, young girls, and that just never left my mind. So that's what really brought me into being a business major. I went to school in Chicago at Loyola University, and I loved my schooling there. The entire time I was working full-time for a consulting firm, which was a privately owned backhouse ERP consulting firm. So that's all supply chain stuff, all software implementation, super boring, but it gave me a lot of cross-reference for what I was learning in school, but underneath it all, I've always learned as I go, and having contextual experience, even while having education, has always been super important to how I grow as a person. And so, I was really thrilled with that education, that experience. And there was some part of me just watching like this Midwest culture of just work, work, work until you're numb, and there's gratification in the pain and the amount that you're working, and that all sort of falls into the cycle of getting after something like a really advantageous business career. But I was sort of staring down the path of, if I keep going towards this, I feel like I'm losing a part of my identity or soul or something that makes life interesting. And then I couldn't shake this fact of like, God, you really spend half of your life working. Am I really going to make it something that I'm pushing myself to do every day that isn't giving back to me creatively? I grew up working in restaurants as a kid too. So that kind of was in the back of my mind. And actually my younger sister was a huge influencer in this decision to leave the business world and go into restaurants, because she's 2.5 years younger than me. And at the time we had both been really into, food service, and I worked in restaurants, and she was starting to do pop-up dinners with her friends as a chef. And I was like, man, she's doing that thing that I really wanted to be involved in. And I'm like, if she's doing it while she's still in school, I kind of want to give it a try. So it's funny, we flipped, and then she went off and now is this huge, awesome business queen working in logistics, same type of thing. But then I moved back into the restaurant world, which was a huge calling for me. And I applied to one place, and it was Royster, which is a restaurant with one of the 4 restaurants within the Alinea group in Chicago. And I was on the opening team at Royster, and that's really where I got my training and I got my start.
So you mentioned the initial California time wine experience. What did you think of sort of the wine culture or wine community that you were coming into contact with?
At that point, it was really wondrous. I had so many questions. It was everything from glamorous to connective with the earth to an element of expression, to something that you as a consumer can have an opinion about. And there's power within that. And I think it just was like eye-opening, and I was just like, God, I want to know more about this. I had always just seen wine being shared and something that's communal and something that's an enriching experience. So I've always it's always been attached in my world as a positive, connective thing. Opening a bottle of wine with people. If you don't want to spend that much time with people, then don't buy a bottle of wine, just get a glass. But yeah, and so that really to me just was like, I guess they say the wine bug, and I couldn't stop thinking about what that world could be.
So as you made the pivot and went back into restaurants, what were you thinking? Did you have like a long-term vision or a long-term goal at that point for yourself?
I wanted to go to learn more about wine, certainly, and from the moment I walked in that restaurant, that was always my North Star, which I think actually really helped me navigate the Chicago restaurant scene in a focused way, which many of my peers have also done. And I think the main commonality is finding that North Star, whether it's management, being a GM, running a bar program. And one thing to note about the Chicago restaurant industry, and this might be an old statistic, you can fact check me, but in Chicago, we have more food industry people per capita than any other city. It's a way of life. Like, the city functions in a serious way based on folks who have Monday and Tuesday off, who are working closing shifts and off at midnight. And it's you can find routine in that. It's not as odd to be in that schedule in a town that's maybe smaller, that doesn't really run off of something like that. I mean, it's massive and it's really connective. And I mean, that just fed, honestly, to the wonder of it all. I mean, meeting and working with people who moved on and worked in different restaurants, and then you're like, hey, I want to dine here, and you show up and you're getting a couple bumps of food for free, so you get to try different things. Like, there's such a communal and sharing space within the industry in Chicago that I will forever cherish and love. But just like I have forever friends who I've met in college that I'll know for the rest of my life, I can certainly say the same about my years in the industry in Chicago. But from day one, I was hired to be a host at Royster, and then eventually worked into host management, reservation management in the front of the house there, which is a really serious program at the Alinea Group, especially when Talk was still owned by Nick Kokonis. They were operating right above Next and Royster, which are the Aviary, which are 3 restaurants of the Alinea Group. And we were basically the test dummies for all of the intro talk programs. So we were using these old beta versions, and it required a ton of manual work that actually gave them practice data for what you see talk being today. Yeah, it was really cool. It took a lot. I mean, part of the opening shift, you would have to go in early and map out all of the reservation times. We had an average that we thought per person or per party size, and then put them at different tables with different scheduled blocks in between. So you wanted to give servers optimally maybe 20 minutes between each table reset. Sometimes it didn't work that way. And sometimes you had a 5:30 ending at 7 reservation coming up on somebody who secured something for 6:45. And so it was a big game of Tetris that was a lot more of a mental game or, a mental challenge than you would think. It wasn't what talk is today. All of those things that are built in were the things we were doing manually. Mm-hmm. And so we had to change on, our iPad screen, basically the way talk tickers work, where it has those averages based. It can move different seats around for you now, and you can see how the day stretches out. We would have to just every time we move something, if it was pre-planned, it would be this whole arrangement to get things moved back together. But in any case, there were 2 SOMs on the team over my time there part of my job was rewriting the wine list when there was new wine to be updated, and I had to print new menus. And so if there were new additions or we were out of stock, I had to remove those from the list. And so I was studying this. At the time, it was this long list of wines and just really curious about them, and started tasting and started being part of the staff trainings, which was, my hospitality training at Royster with the Alinea Group was something I'll never forget. It definitely was intro to fine dining, almost like a college course if you could take it. It was really serious. That was also back in the time where things were a little more heavy-handed in the kitchen, and from management and fine dining spaces. The stories are crazy, but we all had so much fun. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there.
What did you learn about wine at that point and sort of its relation to fine dining or its sort of role in a restaurant like that?
Well, it was after the James Beard Awards. When I first started, it was like, oh my God, I'm starting and staging as a host. What the hell is a stage? I came from this really deep cut in the business world, and I only worked for family-owned restaurants and where they just have you serving beer as a 14-year-old and, prepping or wherever you fit in. And I remember trying to figure out what I was wearing was one of the hardest things, because I'm like, I know I need comfortable shoes, but they said nicer shoes. I didn't know all the hacks that you have as a career industry person at my time re-entering the space. And then very shortly into my time there, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks into it, or felt like that soon, we hosted the James Beard Awards after party. And that was the first time I'd been in a room with all of these chefs from all around that you've heard of, you've seen them on TV, and I was just supposed to be pouring Tattinger out of a Magnum into basically delis. People did have glasses, but it eventually turned into, whatever, and kind of a free-for-all. But, that was our manager at the time was like, have fun, be responsible, it's going to be a great night. And after I was seeing all of these people geeking out, of course other people brought bottles of wine, and then it became this whole, I'm noticing discussions happening. One person's walking around with something special, and pouring it into other people's glasses, and then the reaction on their faces. I was just like, there's something going on here. It's deeper than, pairing with food or just having something on a wine list, or, there just this communal sense, this sharing and exploration. It was just, really exhilarating and inspiring.
What was exciting to you about learning wine from that perspective, from the server perspective, or from the som perspective?
I loved selling a bottle of wine to a table. I freaking loved it. Doing and finding something that worked with them. And I mean, there's scary moments, right? In your beginning of your wine service, you're like, am I going to get the cork out of the bottle? And then in the middle of your wine service, you're like, whatever, this is great. Is it going to pair well with the food? And then towards the end of your wine experience and as you grow, you're like, I'm hitting this out of the park. And it's changing these people's perspectives. And I'm the barrier, I'm helping translate a language, speaking from wine terminology to what consumer language is, and helping them find what they want. And I'm changing the experience of their dining experience, or making an impact on it in a positive way. And it's connective. The connection part is always really great. You build regulars that way. When it's one of the things that every industry person in Chicago will teach you, is that your regulars follow you from restaurant to restaurant. If you're in the industry, you move on. It's real, it happens. And those people will follow you if you present them with a good time. And it's menu knowledge, it's food knowledge, it's being able to take care of allergies properly. Like, it's establishing trust with these people, and also producing something that, you're really listening and understanding what they want and being able to provide them with what they're asking for.
What did you find was the sort of the key to selling wine? What sells a bottle of wine?
I think anyone can sell a bottle of wine and just selling something. But if you want to make a great sale, meaning the person is happy with what they're purchasing, not about the money you're making from it, not about what that's looking like on your check average or anything like that, I think it's listening to what people are interested in, and trying to put yourself in their shoes with the verbiage that they're trying to explain their positive experience to you. And I think that introducing people to new things is really fantastic, but it's also knowing what works for them. If someone is coming in and asking for a California Cabernet, they're probably not going to want a Chardonnay from Burgundy, even though you might be nerding out on that, at this time or something like that. And I think that that's a pretty obvious one, but I think respecting what people have tried in their own right, and giving them something that matches that or elevates it a little bit is a great wine sale.
What wines did you find yourself being sort of drawn to at that point?
My first aha moment wine was Olga Raffaut, Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley, Chinon. I think that Cab Franc was really always jumped out to me because it's so intense. It's dirty, it's funky, or from France and from Chinon specifically. And, violet-y. It's really bold in its nose, and as I've my palate has changed and grown, and I still really love those wines deeply. And also, they were kind of really accessible old vintage wines that were inexpensive. So it was easier to explore these older vintages without breaking the bank, which was really interesting. And then following that was Lopez de Heredia. Those Spanish wines were huge for me. Everything from Bosconia to Vino Tondonia, and that it's the same story there. You could buy like a 2009 Vino Tondonia for $50, and that from Binny's, and that is pretty cool when everything else is current vintage. And it's a great wine, and it kicks it out of the park.
So you mentioned how your role kind of grew while you were at the restaurant Royster. Tell me about, as your what was sort of the peak for you, or what was sort of the peak wine part of that, a job for you?
Well, I was learning a lot while I was there and asking a bunch of questions, and I wanted to move. I knew that the next thing I needed to do was get into a service role. And that's actually when about a year after being at Royster, I left and took a job working on doing private events, partly for this other fine dining restaurant, part of the 50/50 group called Steadfast, which has since then closed. And I was also a server there, and then I got to work behind the bar. I kind of found my place in a situation that needed an all hands on deck person, and we were all that way. All of us who worked at Steadfast, most of us could jump behind the bar, most of us could do what needed to be done. And again, with my North Star is learning wine, that is what encouraged me to take this position. And I could see that I would get there. I would obtain more knowledge faster in a role like that than moving slowly through the progression of being a server. And I didn't want to be a lifelong server. And I think that's what Alinea would have provided, that, or getting into management, which I've seen some of my friends really excel at within the group who are still there. But in my role, I wanted to get in the wine space. And so that's what I did. And that taught me a bunch, and that's when I started studying. And then finally, I'd moved on, and the last restaurant I worked at was a restaurant called Boulevard, where I worked as a captain server there and was on a part of the wine team. And that was when I had taken my intro SOM exam. I actually took that out here in Oregon. When was it? Like 2017, I think. And then, of course, I was out here and I'm like, wait, what? This place is awesome. And so, and you know, again, coming from the Midwest, seeing all the mountains, it's a beautiful space and area. And so I went back to Boulevard, and that's when I was sitting with the beverage director at the time, buying wines and tasting through wines. And I created all of the staff training booklets for this 250 SKU wine list, and organizing and basically being the assistant in that way. And that's when I met the team from Maverick, who is a distribution company. And I got into touch with them through one of my wine sales reps, Dan Hodge from H2 Vino, which now I think is Acme in Illinois. And he put me in touch with the folks at Maverick who reached out and interviewed me. And because of my, business background, I always wanted to get back into something that aligned with both, and that getting into wine sales was the perfect transition to that space, which opened up so many opportunities for me to learn in a very, very fast-paced way, which is what I like.
Before we get to that, let's talk about the decision to go for the SOM exam. What prompted that, and tell me about sort of the process of studying and preparing for that.
What prompted it was I felt that was the necessary direction to move. It was the education that was available at the time for someone, paying her way through life, and with 4 years of student loans, looking at any other type of education is sort of like, wow, that's maybe not going to happen for me for a little while. So I wanted to learn and engage, and that basically became, I had a bunch of friends doing something similar, so there was a lot of wine sharing and maximizing the use of what we all had available to us. It was also clear to me that if sommelier world was my route, which I wasn't quite sure at the time, it was before I had gotten into wine sales, I needed to get those types of certifications or explore that route. I studied on my own. I studied every day. I read all of the books that they tell you to buy. I read them a million times. I wrote note cards. I wrote big poster boards. That's just basically what you do. And it was just my intro, and I never went back for my certified. So I'm not a certified SOM. Maybe I would do that through the WSET moving forward, but not through the Court of Masters. No disrespect. When
you engage with something on that kind of level where you're reading books every day and studying and taking note cards, how does that change your relationship with wine? That was when it became very clear to me that wine is actually a vessel for history, beyond just these communal and engaging moments that I had always, and wondrous moments that I had loved from it. And that's when things dug way deeper for me. So tell me how Oregon became part of this. Well, being in Chicago and working for Maverick, which, by the way, these folks taught me everything that I know about selling wine and engaging with a 10,000 SKU portfolio of imports and DIs and local wines and, all of those types of things, and different restaurants, everything from fine dining to mom and pop shops, and what different people need and different people are looking for. And honestly, I think what did it is actually I went on a trip. I have spent a lot of time in Napa because Napa wines are a huge market in Chicago, or they were when I was selling them. And I loved Napa for what it was. I knew it wasn't for me. If anything, I actually, before moving out here, was strongly considering New York State
upstate New York or the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, because alternative varietal stuff was more of my focus and interest. And I came out here on a trip with the Dreyfus Ashby folks, where we went and saw Joseph Drew, and I sold a bunch of those wines. I won the trip with Maverick, and I think just exploring the vineyards here, although that trip was Pinot Noir and Chardonnay focused as normal, I think really showed me that the character and context of the Willamette Valley was really different from any other place.
In what way, I guess? Obviously, we've heard a lot of variations of that. What was it to you?
The nature of there was like something in the air I couldn't quite explain, of, maybe you can call it the funkiness of Oregon. And I say that really lovingly. I think personally, as someone, I wanted to cut my teeth somewhere and felt like it needed to be in a place that got a little bit more going on, since I'm, a lot that I'm doing is all self-started and has really happened because I've met people who have been incredibly willing to help me, which is great. So the industry was large enough for that. Mm-hmm. Then I also am a big city girl, and I just couldn't fully commit to the Upper Peninsula or fully commit to Upper New York State or the Finger Lakes, because I just was like, I don't know if I'm ready seriously for a full jump into a very, very small town. I needed something in between. So it was a little bit about the character and nature of Oregon, about what's going on here and the growth of alternative varietals in the Gorge and the Willamette Valley and Southern Oregon, and then also because Portland's right here. And yeah.
All right, so we're going to pick up Oregon in a second, but I do want to back up and talk about Maverick a little bit, because obviously that was a pretty key part, as you mentioned. You've been selling wine for a long time at this point. You've been doing all kinds of stuff with restaurants and education. What is different about getting onto the distribution sales side on that level? What did you already know, and what were the big learning moments for you on that side?
I learned that when Germans come to town to sell their wine, you should be prepared to eat 3 dinners in a row, and go to bed at 1 a.m. and then go to a sales meeting the next day. Really, I think so my experience in selling wine in restaurants was, I'm talking to a consumer right there, and I'm obviously selling something to someone who might not have the same language. I'm gonna kind of think out loud on this one a little bit, because it's really different going into the distribution world. It's B2B, you're selling to other businesses. There's other concerns that they have beyond what's in the bottle of the wine that you're selling. Can I move through a glass pour enough that makes me enough margin so that I can showcase these finer wines? There's a whole different financial perspective. And it's a hustle. I mean, if you are showing up and you're really hitting the pavement, you're in your car 8 hours a day, minimum. Maybe you're doing pouring at somebody's wine shop on a Saturday. Selling wine requires supporting the businesses that you sell to immensely, because it takes a village to sell wine. And it was very clear that servers are some of the most important people in getting wine to a consumer's hands, because they are the bridge between the business model and the sommelier's interest, and then keeping it moving forward, because the wine's got to get sold. That's how you buy new stuff when your inventory is low. And so that was really interesting. And then, I was selling wine when 2020 happened, when COVID hit on like March 14th, the shutdown. And in Chicago, we have 30-day terms. So you can buy wine from me and I don't have to get a check from you until 30 days later. So I collected checks after the shutdown, which was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. Mm-hmm. That was before we all had any type of federal relief in place, both for businesses or personal, and any answers. And, this had happened for 4 weeks. Our company isn't the federal government. Nobody, we aren't we had to ask for checks in some format. And, in Illinois, if you don't pay, then they basically put you on the list and you can't buy anything or receive anything, both booze, beer, or alcohol. So for these restaurants who had whatever they had, to make money off of, if they were going to try and continue sales or try and move through this depression that they were facing, and they couldn't get more booze, which is a really easy and great way for markup, that was a big problem. And a lot of these places were family owned. It really showed how much restaurants in Chicago function 2 weeks in the black because of that model. And I mean, these are people who, again, I created relationships with in supporting their business. We had seen successful days together, and we worked together on it. These were partnerships that I'm then asking for money for, who are worried their 50-year-old family-owned business is going to close, and a lot of them did. And it was different. It was a lot different of a perspective, and that really showed how important the relationship is between the sales rep and the restaurant to me. At one point, I bought back a bunch of wine from a restaurant that I had been working with for a while, and I had just sold them for their new menu, and I started, I bought everything that I could and put all of the wine in little bags, and then everybody was doing Zoom classes or Zoom moments with their friends. So I sold packages to a bunch of my friends, and they would get together on these Zoom moments, and I would talk about the wines. And it helped pay back one of those restaurants for some of the things but those were creative things we were all trying to figure out how to do. I mean, I remember when it happened, a lot of us reps would go to our restaurants and say, hey, I need wine for drinking. Can I buy some from you? Instead of grabbing it from our distribution company. Any little bit that we could do, just understanding how the business changed.
Before the shutdown, obviously I want to ask about sort of after as well, but before that, you mentioned obviously relationship, partnership, supporting businesses. Tell me how you saw your role in terms of, how you saw your role in determining what wine goes where, who needs what, how do you understand that, and how do you sort of help people determine what they need and how they're going to sell it? I
think there's a bunch of different umbrellas that people fit underneath for their business. Tasting menus are one thing. Generally, when you're helping with the tasting menu, let me back it up. Figuring out what people want is understanding their palate and understanding their interest, and then if that aligns with their customers or not. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, and most often those people can tell you the difference. And so the first time I would taste with someone, I would bring some rock stars from what I'm looking for. I'd ask them what they're looking for, obviously. I'd bring some things that I'm really excited about, bring some things that they would like to taste, and maybe a little something in between, and kind of see where their meter is and where they stand on wines that I show them, and it tells a lot. If you bring 6 or 7 wines to an initial tasting, of course, bringing something that they're looking for and maybe a couple other things to pencil in, and you definitely strike out. And then sometimes you get closer and you're like, okay, cool. You more mineral driven, and that works for you. Or, oh, you really like something that is more like it's sweeter, it's bigger, it resembles that. So kind of understanding what they like through that process is really great. And then the next step is what they need for their restaurant. And that could be restrictions or qualifications of anything having to do with dollar amounts, amount of wine available for certain runs. They've got a regular who comes in and always buys XYZ things, and with a group of 6 people, there's a bunch of just learning their business. It's like an interview, and many of these people became my friends. It's a close relationship because there's also so much wine out there. Like there really is, and everybody has good wine. There's some portfolios I think that you can say, wow, they've got like a lot of the shit that I like all in one spot, but truth of the matter is there's good wine everywhere. It's understanding what your client wants or your partner wants is the most important part. And then establishing a relationship.
So then you have all of that, and you've taken this time to build the relationships, and then you have 2020 happen. So tell me about, in the aftermath, as places are reevaluating and figuring out, how does your role change, and how does the relationship change?
Well, I think that, I actually left Chicago shortly after that experience. I had already been expressing to the president of Maverick, who is a huge role model of mine, Zach Paytap, that I had interest in the production side of things. But this kind of goes under my whole wanting to experience it all type of thing. Why I left the Alinea Group to go and take a job that allowed me to do 3 different things and paid me significantly less, really less. And I knew I was kind of getting to a point, again, the whole realization, do I want to be in business forever and go down this path that doesn't interest me? And then I kind of was at this space of I'm pouring all of these bottles down the drain at the end of the day. I mean, my roommates and I are drinking as much as we can of the wine that's gone bad, but there's only so much you can do. But still, it was like, God, where's it coming from? It feels like I'm missing something here. And so Zach Paytap actually set me up with the last tasting that I had work with day in Chicago was with John House from Ovum Wines. And it was right before Third Coast Swaff, which is a natural wine event that happens in Chicago. And it was called off, but we made it to one pre-party before the event was called off, before the shutdown happened, and everybody had to go home. And John left me with a whole sample of his wines that he was going to be pouring there. And so him and I had multiple conversations about what production looks like, and before I moved out here, and he really put it into perspective for me, made it very literal and not glamorous. It was like, harvest is a bunch of cleaning, and basically was like, you got to go figure it out for yourself. And so I felt that was the right time. I could see that we were probably going to be sitting still for a long time, and it was time for me after 10 years in Chicago to move on, which is just also another personal goal that I had. I did want to leave at some point, and was feeling really settled and very happy at the time, but I was like, wow, this is a really great, opportunity for me to go learn something new.
So even after getting the literal talk about production, you were still excited about it. Tell me what drew you in at that point? It's
such a great question, because I don't think anybody could have told me anything to stop me, because I was so motivated by the adventure of it. And I'm like, well, if it doesn't work out or I don't like it, I bet I can move back and we're still going to be in lockdown. But even so, I was really motivated to just this mysticism of making it once. And once I went through that process, I was like, man, I got to do this every year.
So tell me about seeking out where you wanted to do production.
Well, John House actually pointed me in the direction of David Hill, where Chad Stock was working. And so was another person named Jeff Veer with Golden Cluster. And so I worked with those two, and Chad taught me a great deal about winemaking. I remember when he actually came and did a whole presentation at Boulevard, the last restaurant that I worked with for Minimus Wines. I had met him then, and he had been on my radar, and John was really right that he was working with alternative varietals and was doing cool things. And jumping in there and interviewing with him and starting harvest there, it was still really new, what that all really meant. Mm-hmm. And then to see another winemaker there using that place as his custom crush facility, doing the same things, going up to the gorge and finding these different varietals that are, it's planted in small quantities like Sagrantino and stuff like that, was like, whoa, there is a lot going on here. And so I was allowed to I bought some fruit from the gorge, smoky. I made a really smoky wine in 2020 and sold it to a friend who runs a rooftop bar in Seattle who made sangria out of it. At least I made my money back. But it was fun. It was like the journey of that wine, of seeing it evolve through all the stages of fermentation. And I really worked in the lab well. I understood the chemistry really well, and that was probably one of my bigger strong suits. And the touch and feeling of it all, it's like cooking. And I've always been a big cook, and I just think that was just such a cool transformation, even though the wine did turn out to be smoky and such a sad reality. But, you know, it is what it is, and that's what we have to face these days.
Obviously, an interesting harvest all around.
Yeah.
Tell me about that harvest from your perspective.
Well, I moved here in June of 2020, and then I forgot I farmed at Patton Valley a little bit with Mike Willison, who was up there. He was keeping me busy, which was really great. He's someone who I met through Maverick as well. So I certainly was welcomed with open arms here through those connections. And so that was great, doing a little bit of that work and getting out. And then harvest started, and everything was great and fun, and suddenly the smoke comes billowing in. And I'm from the Midwest. I've never dealt with wildfires in this proportion, and I don't think anyone in Oregon has dealt with them at this level. And I had just moved my cats into my apartment in Southwest Portland, and where I was at in Southwest, it's almost Lake Oswego. If the Milwaukee fire jumped the river, I would have had to evacuate. I had literally no idea where I would have gone. I didn't know anyone here. And I'm like, I guess we're just going to hunker down and hope this doesn't happen. But harvest itself, I mean, that was the first time FEMA gave any of us at the vineyard N95 masks. Through this whole pandemic. We get them for smoke reasons, which is great, but still. Yeah, it was mayhem. The sky was red. I remember we were up in Tualatin Hills, AVA, in Forest Grove. And it was really smoky up there, but a lot of the fruit that came in from that particular vineyard was pretty much smoke taint free, which I know is crazy to say because a lot of people got hit. Everyone got hit, but they were tasting micro ferments of different fruit to see if it was, emitting any type of smoke taint, which it was, and it was fun to taste through those different things and just have the experience, really.
So you jumped right in making your own wine too, as you said. Tell me about that experience as you're sort of learning and also doing your own. Why did you choose to make what you made, and what was sort of your process for making your first wine?
The fruit was available. I had no connections. My friend Phaedra and I made this together. She was one of my closest friends. I met her at this harvest, and we decided we wanted to go in on some fruit together and do this. And we found Cabernet and Merlot from the gorge, and then decided to whole cluster ferment Cabernet and Merlot to make a carbonic, intense, crazy wine. And that's what we did. And it was so fun. I mean, driving to get the fruit was exhilarating. It felt like it was something I came here to do it. It was really great to have that experience, and amazing for Chad to let us try and do this. And he was super gracious in allowing us the space for creativity. And so in doing all of that, I mean, it was fun. We were just tasting things, taking numbers on it, kind of babying it, totally watching it through the whole process. It's like such an eye-opening and fun experience. And we put a lot of effort into it. There was no thought beyond that for what fruit we were buying. We're just like, let's try and do this. And, maybe there were a couple natural wines that we were influenced by, some French stuff that did some really similar funky things. But I think the wine would have been actually really cool if it wasn't completely smoke tainted. Yeah.
It made some cool sangria.
It did. Mezcal goes a long way. Yeah.
So you, obviously 2020, a big tumultuous year, a lot of new things for you, a lot of change. Tell me about the end of harvest 2020. What were you thinking about at that point? What was sort of your goal or plan at that point? What was next?
I needed to make some money. I spent, was living off of my savings moving out here. And, cellar work is cellar work, and Chad kept me on as long as he could for some extra hours, but then the time runs out at a certain point where they don't need, help in the winery, or the assistant winemakers doing all that stuff, and they slim down. So at that time I had been in chats with Mitchell Wine Group, who was distributing David Hill, and they gave me basically a book and said, go ahead and sell some stuff, and didn't have a route or anything. It was all 1099, and just got after it and sold some wine. When did I start? It was February of 2021. I did that for a couple months, and then they saw what I was doing and hired me on as a full-time sales rep, which I took the job, and I'm happy that I did, but my purpose was to be out here and make wine, and I had mentioned that a million times. They said they would support me, all of these things, which, my boss, Patrick Bernard, absolutely did support me through all of these visions, but working a sales rep job and working a harvest is really, really, really hard. Those aren't two roles that go well together. It's OND, October, November, December is your busiest time of year as a sales rep, and it's the busiest time of year as a harvest worker. So that next harvest in 2021, again, working up at David Hill and helping them for free while having a little bit of space to make my 2021 production was my exchange. So I think I worked about 72 days straight. Yeah. And that was my limit. Once I hit that, I was like, I can't do this again. Yeah.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. Had great months of sales. So I'm like, I guess that helps. But yeah, and that time is when I made a really special wine, which now is in bottle. And Jeff Veer from Golden Cluster helped me out a ton with that production. Yeah.
I'll come back and ask about the wine in a minute, but I want to know first, how had wine sales changed since the pandemic and since taking a year? How was it different?
Well, I can tell you from the Oregon perspective, because that was still Omicron era, right? So Portland took a long time to bounce back. I look at Portland now and I see that it's where Chicago was in 2021. I think that people were drinking the same amount is what we found. They're just getting it from different places. So in 2020, it was now grocery stores as opposed to restaurants. And maybe people are drinking more frequently, but they're reaching for the bottom shelf instead of the top shelf. And then the same thing happened where it was still significantly heavy in the retail sales side. Or if you're selling to shops that do wine clubs, those were big opportunities. But restaurants were very low still in 2021. Yeah, it really did a number on Portland. Portland took a long, long time to bounce back from that compared to other markets. So I would say that actually 2021, there was still purchase of wine, but it was this moving target of like, where is it at? Is it the restaurants are opening again? Oh, we're good for June? Oh, wait, Omicron shutdown's happening. Now we've got to revert back to our retail accounts. It was just kind of all over the place and a really big moving target.
And how does that change what you have to do? How does that change how your relationships work?
Well, I think it's a conversation of being really honest. I think that all of my accounts were nothing but honest with me about the flow of their business. And then it's, as a sales rep, if you have X amount of restaurants versus X amount of retail, you're constantly like, oh, I should probably hedge a little bit more in this area and open some new retail accounts or put a little more focus on these, or staying on top of the new opening restaurants was important too. It's just an ever moving space, but I think that's just the way sales is in general.
How was the second harvest for you compared to the first?
The second harvest was exciting because I went into it with an element of direction. I was able to get my hands on some fruit that generally Jeff works with from the Wirtz Vineyard. And on the days that I couldn't be at the winery, he would help with some of the duties, whether I needed a light punch down or something like that. I think that there was a lot more direction behind it all and more creative expression. But it still was sort of fruit I was able to get my hands on, as opposed to chosen fruit from, really having a straight pathway of what I'm looking to create.
And you mentioned it was a special wine. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's 12 different varietals, maybe more than that, from a nursery row planted by David Wirtz, which was Charles Corey's cellar rat, and the Wirtz Vineyard. And there is an invoice from 1965 for those wines. I think that they'll tell you maybe they're planted in officially 1972 or something like that. It's anywhere between 65 to 75 is how old these vines are. There's a bunch of different fruit in there. There's Sylvaner, different clones of Chardonnay, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Chasselas, a lot of weird, funky stuff. And I think it was a lucky year because all of those, we harvested them all at once. It was pretty overripe. Some of it was. So with different, Chad let me press the wine after it fully fermented over some Riesling, which brought the acid up a bit and helped the fermentation keep moving. I had to acidulate to make sure that it was all in check acid-wise, but it wasn't to a point that was out of this world that ruined the palate. And if anything, it made it work. So it was kind of making it work is what that production was that created something really beautiful. Yeah.
And this was all you solo at this point?
Yeah.
So tell me about launching into a business like that and planning on a name and a theme and a look and all of that. What was your sort of, the ethos of what you wanted to do at that point?
I didn't have one. That is a really hard, branding is hard. That is a challenge that I have been tackling very seriously recently because I didn't have a vision. I think Jeff really helped me put all of that into place, and I bottled this wine under his label. It's his wine, technically, and we called it Mille Fiori. He went through his process. I saw that happen. It made everything sort of click for me. And going through that space, also, it gave me sort of the funding to really get after what my current project is, which is Elle Wine Co. And I've got branding ideas. I've got design ideas. It's just something, I don't know. It was a couple things. I think it was my 2021 Mille Fiori production was a bridge between really being fully independent. And now that I'm, set up in the way that I am now with Elle Wine Co., I'm ready to put my stamp on it and put my energy on it. I think I still was trying to find sense of place. And that's also why, that's sort of just how I felt about that wine too. So it was hard for me to take that other edge of creative direction because I wanted it to be fully my space. And it's crazy. Once you do that, the inspiration comes. I don't know.
So what about after that harvest? What happened? What came next?
So I continued working with Mitchell Wine Group through the following year, and then I took a job running Textura, which is a new winery tasting room and vineyard out here in Eola. Jared Etzel was the winemaker. I was actually put in touch with Mike Etzel Sr. to interview for a job at Sequitur, and based on our conversations, he introduced me to the folks at Textura, and they had purchased the Redford Weddell vineyard, which is Myron Redford's last vineyard to sell, the godfather of Gamay in Oregon, as I call him. And the historic vineyard, in conjunction with being out in the valley and making more of an identity in the valley, because at this point I had just been running the streets. I felt that I didn't have much of, in Portland specifically, selling wine, I felt like I didn't have much of an identity or connective tissue in the valley, and that working at Textura and running that place immensely helped me with those things.
What was your role there?
I was the operations manager. was my title, and that's what it says on LinkedIn. I did everything from coordinating vineyard managers to fixing broken fences to talking to contractors to running wine club to I had one assistant. It's a small program over there with a lot of wine, and I sat in on blending of the vintages. I helped in small ways at harvest. I just basically took care of the estate. And then also wine sales within it, which is a lot of work. A lot of work. So I sat out in 2021. We had opened Textura in September 14th of 2022. Yeah, so I sat out 2022 vintage because that was right when we were opening. And I felt that this was a good step in what I needed to be in order to set myself up for success in 23 and jump back into it. And I'm super thankful that I did that. It was amazing. It's how I got on the board of the Eola Amity Hills, how I fell in love with this portion of the Willamette Valley, and engaged with the neighbors around here, and really ultimately the reason why I'm at Björnson now. So it was absolutely fantastic for all of those reasons for a young, self-started person coming out to the wine industry.
Obviously, a lot of experience you've had before that, but never at an individual winery in that role. Tell me what were the surprises for you? What were the big learning curves?
I think the whole thing was a learning curve. Totally. And being back in national sales, I'm like, God, this is like so. I speak the language. It's a different, it's looking at both things. I'm like, wow, this is definitely where 100% of my talents lie, as opposed to being in different routes. What really was great was re-engaging with my fine dining space and like creating a menu. We offered caviar service and those types of things, creating service structure, creating a wine list. That was stuff that was like brushing off the cobwebs and really awesome to do, and creating a bin system. I was hired in August and we opened on September 14th. I got the place completely decorated, unpacked, and opened in a month, basically by myself, until I hired my tasting room manager, Corinne, who helped me in the last kind of 2 weeks of things. It was insane. It was insane. It was a lot of work, but it felt really gratifying. Uphill things were, there's a lot. I mean, everything from registering blue signs around the valley to setting up a mailbox to, creating relationships with surrounding wineries so that they feel comfortable sending their guests to you. And I think that those were all inherently things that you would know how to do, but in the format of building a business, it just looks different. There was always, if a gate was locked or someone lost a passcode or a battery ran out, the first person to be called was me, and I live in Portland, so it's an hour to get down here. So it was never something I could do. I mean, I basically spent all of my time down here, which was great. I think uphill battles, there's just like property management and land management, and being a tasting room on a vineyard that's has gophers and wildlife and has different ranges of things that it needs. And I learned a lot about managing an estate. Mm-hmm. That's something I had never done before. You mentioned getting on the board for the Eola Amity Hills AVA. Tell me about what prompted you to take that, and what was exciting to you about the Eola Amity Hills as you got here? Well, I think that, as I worked really closely at Textura and was networking with other people around the area, I eventually spent some time here at Björnson, and Mark wanted me to be on a committee for doing something called the Equinox event, which was an event that happened every year for 10 years here in Eola Amity Hills with the board. That's a big consumer-driven tasting event with small food bites and wineries pouring their wine. Mm-hmm. They hadn't done it since 2014. And so we wanted to start it again. Mark was the president at the time, and we did, and it created a successful event. It was really fantastic. We had 32 wineries pouring. There were 6 different caterers from locally that presented food. It was super beautiful and a really awesome turnout. And that's when the opportunity, I'd already been interested to join the board, and I had gotten to know them and working in that way, and eventually was joined early in this year officially as the board secretary. But what piqued my interest was just how all of these people who sit on the board here of these estates and properties, they're responsible for naming the Yosemite Hills as an AVA, naming the Van Duzer corridor as an AVA. They know the growth of this land and how it's changed over time, and the wealth and depth of knowledge that they have and the humility behind it is really, really amazing. And I just learning more about sense of place was just something that really excited me. And Eola. I think it was Myron's story and working on a vineyard that was planted, it was 2006 to Sauvignon Blanc, Albarino, and Gamay, because he wanted to. And it made great wines. And it's like, hold on. There's something cool happening, and right up the road is a place called Brooks that does the same thing, And so I think that that's sort of when it started to catch on that there's a lot more to be found than just Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and a lot of that's happening in Eola.
And how did you find yourself at Björnson?
I got a phone call, and it was the right decision to move at the time. Mark and Patty and I became close and friends, and they knew of my work experience and history, and they were looking to engage more in their national sales space. So it was exactly the role I was looking for. I had a couple other offers at the time for similar roles in Van Duzer and this part of the valley. But there was just something that felt right about Björnson. They're from the Midwest, and I strongly believe that type of energy is something that really attracted me to working with this family. I think that it's really important to find your fit in the wine space and in Oregon, and it's okay if something doesn't fit with you. Like, it's totally okay. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's what I've learned most, because company goal, format, ethics, way of running your business, not just building something up so you can sell it. There's more, and those are all categories that I reflect on personally for what I think is important. I'm not saying that one is right or the other, but it's okay to say no to something that isn't a fit for you, or to express that it's not a fit. And this just felt super right.
Let's talk about 2023 on the Elle Wine Co. part of things. How was last harvest for you, and what is this upcoming harvest looking like?
Last harvest was great. I made my wine over at GC Cellars, so John Groshow's old space up at the top of the hill behind Brooks, where Vincent was making his wines. He was really great. He let me make some Chardonnay there. Saul and Jessica, all those people making wine there, awesome people. Such good folks who have helped me immensely, helping me in everything from finding fruit to tools to helping me with a little bit of extra topping wine, all of the stuff. And it made for the most friendly environment that I had made wine in to date, in just a way of like, we've been there before. We've been new, we've started fresh, and we appreciate and respect that. And it was awesome. I made Chardonnay from a young vineyard, Seawood Vineyard, which is over by now Vincent's new place that he's moving into. And I'll be working with Clive again. I really like the idea of supporting a small growing vineyard as a small growing winemaker. I can do that now, especially because I'm learning. I'm not going to make 100-point wine out of the park. I'm probably not submitting my small production wines to any scoring facility, So I think it's being conscious of giving myself the correct ramp for learning and challenge, and like that equation is different for every person. And then also engaging with things that make me feel more confident in the space, and that I know that I can do well, and it's risk and reward. And I made Chardonnay for the first time on making my own, not just helping someone else, and it scared the shit out of me. It is such a bitch, sorry, swearing, and she's great, she's clean, she's great, she's awesome, but the whole time through it's just such an independent fermentation. It doesn't listen to you, it does its things its own way. You have to listen to it, and that taught me a huge lesson. Almost to the point where I'm like, I'm never gonna do Chardonnay again, and now I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm gonna do it every year. And hey, I like to drink Chardonnay, so why not try and make it and learn how to make it properly? But I hope to, in the future, expand more alternative varietals in my space. I also think that Eola Amity Hills is defining what Oregon Chardonnay is, from a lot of the work that's happening from beautiful productions here, both large and small. So I always just in my purview of really respecting Eola Amity Hills, I want to be making that skew and working with fruit like that. But this upcoming year, I'm purchasing Gamay from Björnson from their Van Duzer vineyard called Pamar. That I believe it would be 4th leaf this year, maybe fifth leaf. And so that's kind of the route I want to head in. And also, again, a nod to Myron Redford, who started Amity Vineyards, the first person to make an organic Gamay, and that happened here in this part of the valley. So I think that I'm moving in a direction of really respecting what Eola is and has been, and then also peppering in some of my own interests in addition to that. So I will be making my wine here at Björnson this year, and hopefully moving forward. And they're just as working with Vincent, which he had offered for me to continue. Now I'm all in one place, so it makes more sense this way. Just another example of working with some of the best humans and such a supportive environment. So it's fantastic.
What are the long-term visions for Elle for you? What have you not done with it that you would like to do?
For Elle Wine Co., well, it's just getting started. I hope to have everything buttoned up and released by February, March of next year. I want to sell my wine. I want to contribute to impactfulness and connection in all of those ways that I had experienced it before. This isn't going to be Elle Wine's huge takeover. I think that engaging in all different aspects of the industry makes you well-rounded in its experience. I will hope to always continue to make wine in the entirety of my career, and I hope to grow it into something that remains boutique, and I'm not looking to build a brand that I can ramp all the way up and sell. I really want it to be a serious, finite, well thought out passion project. Passion project makes it seem trivial, but I think that that's being disillusioned to the word passion. So something that, I want to hone my craft and make good wine and share it.
As you look ahead for yourself then, outside of Elle Wine Co., what else is on your horizon, personally or professionally? Anything you're excited for, anything you haven't done that you want to try? Any projects on the horizon that you're interested in?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be engaging more in national sales with Björnson, because I think that it's really enriching and important to go to other markets to see what's going on. I'm excited to be, in a position to understand who's creating cool food and what people are doing in these different spaces, what people are drinking, and connecting with community outside of Oregon. In 2020, I had this grand plan to go to Spain with one of my dear friends, and of course something happened. So we're doing that again. It's going to happen in May of this year. So personally, I've got a little bit of travel ahead of me. And in which case, maybe I'll try and find a way to go to Lopez de Heredia. And see, kind of going back to the roots on that one. And yeah, passion-wise, that's really it. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about sort of your welcome into Oregon and the industry here. Tell me about where the industry is headed from your perspective. What does it look like now? Where is it going? And what are the things you're excited for in Oregon's future?
I think that there's a lot of wine that needs to be sold right now for many different reasons. It's already in bottle. I am a firm believer that in terms of wine sales, the pendulum always swings the other way. So I'm looking forward to when that happens. But you can tell right now this season with so much fruit on the vine and none of it being sold, or a lot of fruit remaining to be sold. I'm seeing posts every day. Here's 25 tons of Pinot if you can trade any winery equipment, or hey, we've got basically a listing 100 different tons of fruit that people aren't purchasing. So right now it's pretty bleak for the farmers out there. And I hope that changes for them too. I think that I'm seeing a lot more sparkling production happening in Oregon, and I think that's really awesome. And I'm a huge supporter of that, especially method champenois stuff. I think it's huge. I think we should be doing more of it. And if you have a plan, and a sparkling plan in place, and there are fires, at least you're knowing you're getting fruit off the vine in time, so to speak. And yeah, I think there's a new movement of, the younger generation of wine that has always been creeping up, and my generation is now here in ways that are impactful. And there's a lot of other people my age who are doing what I'm doing. And I think it's, about listening to us and having, to see what the creativity looks like. I mean, we're all doing things in scrappy ways. Like, how can we get a wine production moving and pay less amount for our custom crush fees because we're all self-funded, and how can I work more to get these types of things back, and how can I help each other? And there's a really cool network of what's going on in that space for smaller production, newer, younger winemakers. And the folks that are already in their stride that are helping them are huge. And that support, I think, should carry through, especially as we see larger corporations coming and purchasing land and things of that nature, which you can have a million perspectives on. Seriously, they can be good and bad, but the trend of the little guys is pretty cool. I like that there's a lot of small production people out here.
Last question for you. What is your proudest accomplishment or greatest achievement so far?
I think that moving out to Oregon, in June of 2020, I drove across the country, packed up my car with my childhood best friend who met me in Chicago from Cleveland. And then creating stability in a life out here when I knew zero people during COVID in Portland was the most challenging thing that I had ever had to do. And I would never do it to myself again, but it changed me and grew me in a way that that was incredibly significant. I spent a lot of time with myself. I make a joke with my friends where I'm like, was Henry David Thoreau for X going into the woods and living for 14 years or whatever his story was. That's what it felt like. And even, and I'm like maybe slightly dramatic, but that just, it pushed me into a space of really thinking about finding my voice and what's important to me and how to ask for what I need. And those qualities are stronger than they ever have been for me. And that those are really important things.
All right. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have today? Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover today?
No, I think that's everything.
Excellent.
can't think of anything else. Like,
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us, sharing this beautiful day out here in wine country with us. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich.